Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee. Sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
So when it comes to federal law enforcement, there's the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service. I'd venture to say that most Americans have heard of those agencies, probably have a good idea of what they do, especially when there's so many TV shows named after all of these agencies these days. Exactly. There's also one big federal investigative agency that is relatively new, coming out of September 11th and the 2001 attacks and the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. So this is a law enforcement agency that we're talking about today, and it's something a lot of people still may not fully or entirely understand what it is exactly they do.
Yeah, we're talking about Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI in short. They're a federal law enforcement agency with a national presence, including in the Southwest. And so joining us today is someone who can shed some more light on the agency, what all you do in its complexities, and your collective mission. So let's bring you in, introduce our guest. JT Stevens is the special agent in charge of the El Paso Division for Homeland Security Investigations, which also includes us here in New Mexico. Special Agent Stevens, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
And before we get into what all HSI does exactly, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your role with Homeland Security Investigations, and what path in your career and experience led you to be the special agent in charge in the El Paso Division?
So as the acting special agent in charge of HSI El Paso, I oversee all of New Mexico and West Texas offices for HSI. We have about 400 personnel within this region that goes out and conducts complex conspiracy investigations into criminal organizations that exploit America's trade, travel, and finance. As to how I got here, I started my career with the state police in Arizona. I was a state trooper there. Went over, did a little time as a gang detective, went to an undercover detective, and then kind of saw the federal presence in narcotics investigations. And that kind of provided me with a curiosity. And next thing I know, I was applying. And after 10 and a half years with the state police, I left that agency, came over to what at the time was the U.S. Customs Service, applied for them. And here I am.
And so in your path of your career, year-wise, where was 9/11? Where did that fall in for you?
So I had initially hired on with the state police in 1993.
Okay.
So I'd been on about 8 years at the time that it occurred.
Got you. So yeah, you got to essentially, you were around in the law enforcement career as HSI, or really DHS, Department of Homeland Security, gets created, and then HSI kind of becomes itself through that apparatus. We mentioned off the top the broader Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, created after 9/11, combined 22 federal agencies and agencies that are basically operating with somewhat similar motives, but to address problems and threats to the United States. But they were all working in different capacities, different cabinets, essentially, cabinet level departments. So this brings them all under one umbrella, 22 agencies. The goal really to create more collaboration in responding to and preventing natural and man-made disasters. So JT, wanted to ask, how would you describe Homeland Security's overall mission and where HSI falls into that?
Okay. I would like to kind of add to one point you talked about. It allows for collaboration of those agencies within the department, but what we really need to do to be successful at our mission is communication. And it's great to collaborate, but I think people can collaborate without communicating. And like for us, what we see is now there's this mixture of what used to be drug trafficking organizations and human smuggling organizations that are now working together, and they're really just transnational criminal organizations. They're out there to exploit the trade, travel, or finance, and what they're doing, though, is they're communicating. And if we want to be able to overcome that, we have to communicate as much or as effectively as they do to be able to get their product or people across. As to where Homeland Security investigations lies, as you indicated, there's a significant number of components that lie within Department of Homeland Security. So people normally refer to us, they go, oh, you guys are Homeland, or they think we're associated with the show Homeland, which we're not. And so Homeland is very broad, and so we try and narrow it down as we are the detectives for the department. We are Department of Homeland Security's principal investigative arm. So if it's United States Border Patrol or the Customs and Border Protection that comes up with a seizure or person that maybe brought something in or is taking something out of the country, we are their call.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say you differ from the FBI? Because we know that the FBI is a long-standing federal investigative organization or agency. They obviously do a lot of different investigations when it comes to federal charges, drugs, drug trafficking, that kind of stuff. It could be investigations on Indian country, a lot of other places too. But how do you say HSI differs from like an agency from like the FBI?
So obviously there's multiple agencies. You get the FBI, you get the DEA, right? And we have sometimes similar mission sets. But what I want to say what makes us unique or different than the FBI. While we all partner together and we work together, like here in New Mexico, we work incredibly close with the FBI here. Their special agent in charge, Raul Bahanda, is not only a friend, but he's a great partner in investigations. For us, how we differ is we, again, came from the old United States Customs Service and the Immigration and Naturalization Service. So we have some very unique, not only investigative tools, but administrative tools as part of our authorities, and I think that makes us unique in that space. While we are not the FBI, we don't have the name recognition. We haven't been around as long as they have. If you look back at our agencies that we came from, they were long-standing. The U.S. Customs Service was at one point the oldest law enforcement investigative agency.
But you collaborate with the FBI a lot, it sounds like.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And there are a lot of things that you focus on as far as securing the United States, but let's start with a topic that we know is a big one on a lot of people's minds, especially with this being a presidential election season year, border security. With that, we know there are drug, human smuggling, gun trafficking concerns, but if we can just start with the broad border security idea, what is HSI's role in securing the border, especially, along the New Mexico state line for our listeners and viewers?
So this is a very unique office to work in, and I say that because I've got the West Texas portion and the New Mexico portion. And what makes this extremely unique is, and let's just talk border security. Border Patrol is there on the front lines. They work in between the ports of entry, while Customs and Border Protection works at the ports of entries. So if Customs and Border Protection obtains a seizure of a vehicle coming across, or a body carrier, or an internal swallower, right, they're going to call us. Hey, we've got a vehicle that appears to be loaded, we've x-rayed it, or we've checked it out, there appears to be a non-factory compartment with packages, and they're going to call our agent responds, and that's the beginning of an investigation for us there. In between the ports of entry, we work with Border Patrol significantly, because they're trying to work on the organizations that exploit the ports, that go around the ports of entry where people would normally present themselves for admission into the United States. The footprint that I was discussing is unique because Texas, while Border Patrol obviously works in Texas and New Mexico, you've got an additional presence there of the National Guard. You've got an additional presence of the Texas Department of Public Safety and Operation Lone Star. And the efforts there, as well as the efforts to our west in Arizona, where you have law enforcement that's also working with Border Patrol, state and local, it creates a push. There's what I would call a forced migration into the state of New Mexico. And that forced migration pushes a lot of people through the Santa Teresa area. And we've seen that because there are more than 1/3 of all gotaways occurring on the southwest border are occurring through the Santa Teresa ports of entry. And that means individuals that weren't able to be apprehended, and they were able to see them either on cameras or detection via some other means, and that they got away. We try and work with our Border Patrol partners to see where did they go, did they get in a car, and then they go from our New Mexico location, normally into El Paso, where they go to a stash house, and then eventually make their way to Albuquerque and wind up in a stash house here, which is where we saw our initial increase in October of 2022.
So because, as you pointed out, there's not as much local law enforcement collaboration with Border Patrol at our border, would you say that it's easier to come into New Mexico than an Arizona or a Texas?
And so I will clarify, there is collaboration with our state and local counterparts in Border Patrol, but it's obviously, I think it's a more politically sensitive issue here. So we do see that, but it does create that forced migration. It does create a challenge, and so they do come here because they know there's going to be less deterrence on that.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Monica Wicki, host of New Mexico Living. This episode of New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS. If you enjoy New Mexico News Insiders, check out New Mexico in Focus, a great source for insights about what's happening in our state. Catch their podcasts and videos at nmpbs.org or stream it anytime, anywhere on the free PBS app. Now, let's continue to New Mexico News Insiders.
One of the other major areas, I think, of concern that we've had when we're talking about border issues with Mexico, it's certainly fentanyl. We hear it constantly as one of the big problems plaguing Albuquerque and New Mexico. One of the operations HSI is involved in is something called Operation Chainbreaker. Can you explain that to me? What is Operation Chainbreaker? How long has it been going on? What is it?
So Operation Chainbreaker is an agency priority for us, and it's our counter-opioid national effort that's being ran out of HSI El Paso. And what we've done is we've utilized our unique customs authorities, and what we're doing is we're targeting the supply chain of pill press parts and other things as they enter the United States.
Okay. And how long has it been going on now for?
So we started this operation a couple of years ago in 2021. It's been extremely successful. It's our national effort, right? We have a national effort we're working on, and we're working local. We are a public safety agency. We've had about 442 investigations that spawned off of our efforts in that program.
And do you feel like, you said it's been successful, do you feel like it's making a difference that we can see, or is it just, getting something like this started is really something that we need to be doing because everybody is talking about just what an impact fentanyl is having on communities?
I think we have to improvise and adapt along with the organizations. As the organizations bring their contraband in, normally they smuggle through the ports of entry. They are at their most vulnerable as they enter into the United States through the ports of entry because it's a human making contact with another human. And obviously they have nervous indicators. That's where they're susceptible to being caught. So how do they get around that? This is how they get around that. It's more difficult to smuggle that through or in between the ports of entries, even though that has been done on occasion. So what they've done is they've utilized America's legitimate trade to be able to do that, to ship it into the United States, where labs are now set up domestically, and the fentanyl is manufactured within the United States. So that's a great opportunity for them to try and circumvent that. So there are some laws that are being worked on because we know that the chemicals as well as the pill press parts are being brought in legally. So there are some current laws that are being worked on to try and tap that down.
And that operation, as we understand, it's a part of a series of government operations aimed at targeting the supply chain. And, you use computer-based analytic tools to target things like chemical supplies and the equipment needed to manufacture those fentanyl pills. Can you walk us through, though, like an example of what an investigation like that looks like?
For us, we're working heavily with the Customs and Border Protection. They have a center that sits in Virginia. It's called the National Targeting Center. They have targeters that are there. And so what we do is we look at these shipments and parts that are coming in. We know that not a lot of people need pill press dyes, pill presses or dye parts. So what we're doing is we're looking at those and we're like, okay, hey, they're going to this location. And we've got chemicals that are being shipped there as well. That's abnormal. So we work with those guys. We work with our state and local counterparts as well to kind of look into the addresses where these are going. Is there a legitimate need for these devices or for these chemicals going there? And if there's not, we normally start kind of deep diving into the occupants of the location, doing surveillance and things such as that to kind of see what's happening there.
So if a giant pill press comes across the border from Mexico to the United States, for example, that'll flag some of your investigators.
Yes.
Okay.
Very interesting. We know that border issues, I mean, you touched on this, they are politically sensitive, especially over the last decade. Things have gotten really political. But on the other hand, from your perspective, the work going on there to keep illegal activity from spilling across the border, whether it's guns, fentanyl, drugs, at least from the El Paso, New Mexico side of things, do you feel like there's enough resources that you and your team, HSI, has to deal with just the illegal issues that are going on?
So that's always a tricky question, right? I don't think there's any employer that's not going to say, I could use more personnel to be able to do that.
We haven't heard anyone say that. So
No, never.
to be
Yeah.
fair, everyone says we need more resources. But what are your challenges? Yeah.
I think for us, number one, is as a leader for this agency in this area, it's to be a good steward of the resources I do have. So are we staffing appropriately? Are we looking at the things we really need to be looking at that's unique to HSI and our statutory authorities? So for us, it's kind of doing that. I think for us, we're doing well because we do a lot through partnerships. Public safety is what HSI is all about. And so for us, we do a lot through partnerships. So when you start talking the border, and on the other side of the border, we have a significant international footprint. We have 93 offices in about 56 countries. And we have TCIUs, which are transnational criminal investigative units, which work with HSI to be able to either do investigations in that country or maybe an investigation that starts here and we send it out there and they further it in the country. So we've had some here, including one of our stash houses here in Albuquerque where we identified somebody that had been extorted. The kids were being held hostage on that, and we were able to work that case, and we worked it all the way back to Guatemala. And we were able to have them, the organization worked up in Guatemala, and our office there was able to go after the targets.
Okay. And that organized crime that we hear about, there's one group that we've been hearing about a little more lately, it seems like. I wanted to ask you about the Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragura. There's been some reporting that this transnational criminal operation from Latin America has infiltrated into the United States. Is this group on HSI's radar, and what can you share with us about them?
So it is on HSI's radar. And what we're doing is we're working with all of our agencies. Again, we get more done through collaboration and communication. And so we're working not only with our state and local partners, and I'll give an example just here locally. We're working with Albuquerque Police. We're working with the FBI. We've tried to work with them because, again, we have these very unique authorities. And so our understanding of the Immigration and Nationality Act, we're able to kind of use that to go out and, I want to say, identify where some of the individuals are placed. They're in cities around the United States currently, and again, every HSI office that has a TDA presence, I would say, is actively working them with their state and local partners.
Are they in New Mexico?
They are in New Mexico.
Is this something you think the general public should be aware of or concerned about?
I think the general public should be concerned with any criminal activity because there's organizations that are out there that are trying to outdo the other. And so with that, there's always the propensity for violence. And so I'd say that's the case. As far as the TDA, they have a decent footprint in some other cities. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about things going on in Chicago and New York and Denver. But in El Paso, we had a case where there was a jewelry store robbery that had occurred out of Denver, and they were attempting to leave the country, and they had bedded down in El Paso. And fortunately, we were able to identify where they were at, and we were able to get a warrant. We went to the hotel. We were able to arrest them. We were able to recover some of the jewelry and also apprehend everybody that was involved in the robbery.
Wow. Yeah, it's a work that certainly takes you long distances is what it feels like. I'm just hearing some of these stories, interstate connections and whatnot. I want to talk about human smuggling operations. Our investigative colleague, Ann Perret, she's published a few stories about the increase in stash houses popping up around Albuquerque. Something you mentioned a little bit earlier in our conversation were these stash houses. It is something local law enforcement agencies we know, like APD and BCSO, have encountered these houses. From your view, how big of a problem is human smuggling in New Mexico, and how is HSI helping address that?
I would say it's significant in New Mexico. How we're doing it, we're working with our Border Patrol counterparts down south. I have an office that's in Las Cruces and Deming. If those offices see something that's coming north, they're coordinating with our local office up here, and we're working it together. Again, Border Patrol is a significant partner for us. We have our enforcement removal operations that comes out and helps us as well when we encounter these stash houses, because they're extremely time-consuming. Not only are they time-consuming, they require a lot of hours and a lot of effort in them. I think we hit a house 2 years ago that had 92 people in it, and that will normally take us several days to get through just the processing aspects, not including all the interviews, collecting evidence, going through evidence. So we have to collaborate on those to be successful. So we work with Albuquerque PD, we work with Bernalillo County, we work with the state police, but they're here. They're here, and they're housing them in most every single type of community. In the wealthier, in the, I want to say the less wealthy communities, they're stashing them.
For people who aren't familiar really what a stash house is, can you explain a little bit about just what they are and like what's the motive behind, bringing a bunch of people and squeezing them into a household like you guys are coming across?
So they bring them up to Albuquerque. It's the next logical step getting away from the border, and they know once they make it past the checkpoint, they're pretty much home free if they can get up to I-40. So this is a great stop for them to come up here, consolidate, make any last payments or such. So what we've seen up here and started seeing was extortion. So they bring them up here, they put them in a house, and the keeper happens to be all of a sudden extorting them. They're like, okay, we're not going to let you go until you give us $10,000 more. And what we know is a lot of them have already given everything they have to be able to get here. I think most of us know, we understand why they're wanting to come to America. They want to have a greater life. They want to have a better life. But instead of encountering the American dream, they encounter the American nightmare, which is greed. And these organizations are now exploiting them for more money. And like I said, the one case, I know I talked with Ann about it when we did her story, was you have children that are being exploited. And so, like for us, what we do is we come in, we'll get a call from a 911 center from another state, or maybe I think Phoenix PD had called us on that one, or we'll get a call from LAPD saying, hey, we've got a relative that says they're being held hostage in Albuquerque, and they're trying to extort them. They want money. And so for us, we know that they'll bring them up here and they'll try and get more money out of them.
And then what can you do in that situation?
So we'll normally try and start looking at the phones. Where's the phones at? Can we find out where they're at? Can we run an undercover into the situation? So there's a lot of different options that we'll do to be able to try and rescue who's ever being extorted, because what we know and we've seen in houses around the country and over the years that I've done this, aside from the extortion, there's beatings, there's rapes. So it's extremely dire conditions. You've got people packed into a house. It's not the best conditions. There's not much food there. We've seen them where they're just maybe eating tortillas. And again, these organizations that are bringing them up, most of the people we're encountering, and I'll go back south for just a moment, as they come into the United States, these organizations that are smuggling them in, they are not a travel organization. They're not here to ensure that you've got great accommodations and you're set up for success on your trip and your voyage as you go northbound into the United States. Most of the individuals that are coming in and coming across foot are dehydrated before they ever enter the United States. Most of them haven't eaten anything of substance in days, or could be weeks. And so they're dehydrated, they're malnourished, and then they begin their trip into the United States in 100+ degree weather, set up for failure. And this is why we've seen such a significant uptick in the number of deaths in the desert that are occurring down there. And if they happen to make it to a house in El Paso and get brought to Albuquerque, then here they are getting extorted even further. And so it's an unfortunate thing. It's sad to see.
Yeah, it sounds like a nightmare. Shifting from the border, Homeland Security, we know you guys are involved in just so many complex investigative type of things, it sounds like. But one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is how HSI is involved in trying to protect people from online threats, because that's the thing too. There's a recent campaign you all launched partnering with Snapchat called No to Protect, aimed at educating teens. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How does it work and what's the intent there?
Yes, it just came out on October 1st. They just announced that with Snapchat, because what we've seen is Snapchat, that platform's been used to not only exploit teens, but it's also used for contraband, for dealing drugs and other things. So it's great that they've partnered with us. Really, this Know to Protect Snapchat lens is an innovative virtual prevention tool that's aimed to help teens identify and navigate online risk. And so for us, our Know to Protect, this rolled out last year during the summer when a lot of kids were home from school. So we provide not only that resource where they can go online and read about some of that, but even HSI agents in the local community will come out and we'll go present at schools and churches, and we'll talk about online safety and sextortion and those things, because we live in the very communities that we work. And so we want to be able to provide not only that relationship, but that resource to our friends and neighbors in our neighborhoods.
So it sounds like that messaging is like within the app. Like if the kid is on Snapchat, they'll now be able to see messaging from like HSI
Yes.
about these threats and just kind of help educate them that they're out there.
Yes. And for us, I'm excited to hear about some of the successes from it, because obviously it's a big step for a social media company to work with a federal law enforcement investigative agency on that. But I think Snapchat also realizes that there are predators that are lurking on the internet. So it's a great opportunity for us to work together with them and save children.
Obviously, we've talked about the wide gamut of investigations that HSI has its hand in, whether it's, the elements of human smuggling, whether you're talking about internet threats, whether you're talking about, problems with drug trafficking. More broadly, though, in your time at HSI, we wanted to ask, picking from any one of the topics that you've been able to talk to us here about, is there a particular case or an issue that stands out to you in your time that you can maybe share with us?
So I think there's two things I think I would like to highlight. So in this area, you've got the national labs. You've got White Sands, you've got Alamos, you've got the military bases, you've got a lot of technology that exists here. And one of the things that we do and we work on is counterproliferation. We want to prevent our dual-use technology, our technology from winding up in the hands of bad actors. And so we have those type of investigations that are here. And again, we know people come from all over the world and come here because they want to be able to get to the labs or they want to see certain things. And we are the primary investigative agency for export. So we want to ensure that our technology is not going to other countries without the proper licensing, et cetera. So that's one of the things, and we'll do presentations for businesses on that. We've got a presentation called Operation Shield America. I can provide you guys with that if you want to put that link on your webpage. We'd love to be able to have businesses see that, because we want to protect all the work that they've done and the technology here in the United States from, again, ending up in bad actors' hands.
It's interesting. Also, the broad range of issues that HSI deals with, I'm curious, is there ever a time that the general public may interface with Homeland Security agents, or are you more of an agency that's kind of working in the background and people only really see you or interact with you if they've broken the law?
I think we kind of held our legacy agencies aspect of just being there and not being out front. So we're all about partnership. And so I don't need to be in the front. I don't need to be on the podium. Like, let's just go do what we do do it well, and then go back. I think as far as people encountering us, I think there's things that people don't know that we do, like our intellectual property rights. We don't do a significant amount of that here, but like normally in those instances, we're looking for health and safety, but fake cancer drugs. When I was in Las Vegas, we had a case where we were working an organization that was selling fake cancer drugs, fake airbags, right? That's a bad thing, right? Nobody wants to have one of those that don't deploy when you need it to deploy. So anything that in the intellectual property rights community is significant for us. You may encounter us there. I think we bring a lot of partnerships to the table. Those that work in the drug community, they'll get to see us a lot because we have a significant partner in the New Mexico State Police. They are a phenomenal partner. Their chief is also a great friend, and all of their K-9 enforcement officers are task force officers with us. Anytime they encounter a drug load, they call our office. They sit in our office, so they'll call our duty agent. Our agent responds out, and we'll take that drug load that they've got that's traveling across I-40 or up I-25, and we'll either work it forward to where it was going, or we'll try and work it back to where it came from and attempt to identify the source. So it's great for us because not only do we have the ports of entry we deal with and we're getting it and protecting it from coming northbound, but because of our partnership with the New Mexico State Police, as the contraband starts to come across I-40 and maybe be destined for north up to Denver or on across the U.S., we're able to get that and maybe take it, identify which house it's going to or which organization it's going into in Chicago or New York. And
yeah, it's interesting to hear the not only the distance that a lot of this investigative stuff spans, but also just the broad range of topics that we've covered here, from smuggling to even some of the intellectual property and technological threats that bootleg and counterfeit stuff can stand for Americans here. Is there anything else that you want people to know that maybe we haven't touched on that you wanted to put out there?
We are Homeland Security Investigations, and I know people that as they look, they would say, oh, well, you guys are part of ICE. And I think there was a fear or hesitance in communities to engage with us because they felt, oh, my immigration status here, I can't report something because I don't want them coming looking for me. And we don't ever want anyone to fear reporting criminal activity because of their immigration status, because that's not what we're looking at. If they come in and they have a crime to report, or they want to report drug smuggling or human trafficking, like, by all means, please report that to us, and don't worry about what your immigration status is, because what we're looking at is the information they're providing and trying to go out and identify that network that they're referring to.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Monica Wicki, host of New Mexico Living. This episode of New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS. If you enjoy New Mexico News Insiders, check out New Mexico in Focus, a great source for insights about what's happening in our state. Catch their podcast and videos at nmpbs.org or stream it anytime, anywhere on the free PBS app. Now, let's continue to New Mexico News Insiders.
What's the most rewarding part of the job for you?
I think there's several. On the human smuggling front, it can be challenging to work that because we're encountering people that now their dream has been stopped. And again, we understand why they want to come here to the United States. But when you have people being extorted and you have the opportunity to rescue them from that, I was able to see that when I first got here, and to hear the stories from my guys who went out and responded to that, it brings back a moment in my career as a supervisory special agent in Phoenix, Arizona, where we rescued a young girl who was being held by an organization, and her mother had called us, and we went out and we were able to find her, and we were able to rescue her. And to this day, she texts us every single year and lets us know how she's doing, and that she wants to go in federal law enforcement. And she just had a quinceañera this year. And so those type of things can be extremely, extremely rewarding. Yeah.
Wow.
It's been incredible.
Well, Special Agent Stevens, we appreciate you joining us and sharing all of this with us. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks again to HSI's Special Agent in Charge in El Paso, J.T. Stevens, for joining us for this conversation. I think it was very informative and illuminating as far as what HSI does, and it sounds like stash houses are definitely on their radar here in Albuquerque.
Yeah, and they do a lot of work in the background, as Agent Stevens said, and they don't really like to put themselves in the forefront of these investigations, but obviously they are a very powerful investigative force that continues its work in many ways across New Mexico. We thank you for joining us for this episode of New Mexico News Insiders. If you're watching on Fox New Mexico, this has been an abbreviated conversation. You can watch the full podcast on krqe.com and also on our KRQE YouTube page. Just look for New Mexico News Insiders. Of course, we're also on all those audio platforms. And if you have an idea, let us know. I'm at chris.mckee@krqe.com. Also at Chris McKee TV.
And I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart@krqe.com via email, and GBurkNM on social media. Thank you all for joining us.